gonna be honest, I want the fastest guy for the most amount of money you can come up with.
Every great car reality TV show has roughly the same formula for success: a great show and great drama. And Street Outlaws had both of those things in buckets. No wonder the show is one of the greatest car shows to ever be on television.
What happened here, though? What happened?
I don't know.
The road's on his
He left
road or
way
what?
early. He left before the light ever dropped, so that's a win for Dave. Hey, he never, no, it didn't. No, it didn't. Not on it. Hey, good job. Yeah, the light was still up and he left. That's why I went down there. Good job, man.
Street Outlaws is one of the world's greatest shows, and it also happens to be one of the world's most controversial. Almost every episode of the show came with its controversy, and this was expected since the premise of the show itself was extremely controversial. It was based on 10 street racers, racing every week against the law and themselves. A show like this was bound to have dark secrets since we don't even know if what they were doing was legal or not. In this video, we'll be looking at the dark secrets that the Street Outlaws kept hidden, and many of them would certainly shock you. The first secret of the Street Outlaws is that many of the racers, including the producers of the show, thought it would fail. That's right, no one believed that the show would become a huge success in any way, shape, or form. People often say that you have to believe in yourself to achieve anything worthwhile, but according to Justin Big Chief Shearer, none of the cast and crew of the show believed in the idea of the Street Outlaws. According to Big Chief, the show was just a tiny affair until smaller media houses came around and started recording the races. After a while, the Discovery Channel came knocking on their doors to move the show to their network. When the cast got on the network and started working on the first season of the Street Outlaws, they didn't believe they would be renewed for another season. That's why they decided to give it their all, because they knew that they had absolutely nothing to lose. Since it was going to be just one season, they were not going to hold back, and they didn't. This impressed Discovery Channel and their viewers so much that the company decided to continue renewing the show. And now, that street race show has gotten into a mega series with 10 seasons. Interestingly, when the crew from the Discovery Channel first started filming the show, Joe Dominator Woods believed that the crew were underground reporters who wanted to see how the world of street racing operated. He even believed that after filming, the whole crew would get into legal trouble. Thankfully, that's not what happened, and Street Outlaws would go on to win the hearts and minds of many car and racing enthusiasts. Another secret you probably didn't know is that the show's racers almost lost their licenses because of the show. The Street Outlaws, as a TV show, is one of the very few TV shows that dance on the edges of what's illegal and what's not. Street races are illegal, however, that's exactly what's being portrayed on the show. As you expected, this can have some very interesting consequences. For instance, this led to the National Hot Rod Association threatening drivers with the loss of their racing license should they appear on the show. This, of course, annoyed most of the drivers, and many of them lashed out against the organization. The organization replied and said that all they wanted to do was to discourage members of their association from taking part in a show that promoted illegal activities. Strangely, the Street Outlaws itself isn't an illegal show. That's right, despite being outlaws, what the cast of the show was doing was very much within the law. Every single race was cleared and permitted by the city the crew happened to be visiting that episode. Here's how the races went. The crew would ask for a permit, which would either be denied or approved by local officials. To make sure everything was legal and safe, local police officers would often drop by to keep an eye on the races, and the roads were always shut down for the racers' private use. That's right, despite shooting on the premise of illegal street races, the Street Outlaws weren't illegal at all. It was as far from illegal as possible to get. However, that didn't stop the racers on the show from participating in illegal races. Since the races on the show were super safe and legal, the racers on the show, who were used to the life of illegal racing, would try to seek out illegal races in the city where they were supposed to shoot. The interesting thing, though, was that these men never really found anyone. Most times, they just raced alone. So even though they wanted to race illegally, they never really had the chance to do it. However, on one of the few occasions that the cast of the show did find illegal races, they got in trouble. In one of those illegal races, Daddy Dave got himself into more than a fair amount of trouble, as he flipped his car 6 times and slammed the thing into a wall.
I don't know. I don't know.
Who's that? Who's that? Hey, was that Dave?
Clear the starting line. Clear the starting line.
He eventually got so injured that he had to get admitted to a hospital ward. Thankfully, he survived the wreck, but suffered a concussion and bruised lung in the process. But Daddy Dave wasn't the only driver on the show to get into a crash. Big Chief also got into a crash. However, his crash was on the show and wasn't during an illegal street race. Despite being a legal show, the Street Outlaws wasn't the safest show, since it was a frag race show, and these races can be really dangerous. So how did the crash happen? It all happened when he was racing against Brian Chucky Davis, and he crossed over the lane and hit Chucky's vehicle before his car flipped and landed in a ditch. Chucky's car, on the other hand, spun over a curb before finally stopping in a grassy area. Big Chief was in a terrible state after the race as he suffered spinal cord injuries and a broken collarbone. Interestingly, despite the possibility of dangerous accidents happening on the set of the show, no accident has ever been fatal. But that doesn't mean members of the show haven't died. DeMoss and Tyler Flip Pitty, for example, lost their lives while they were cast members of the show. While there isn't a lot of evidence for what happened to those two promising racers, we do know that the rumors say that both men must have died by their own hands. The show's cast may never have participated in illegal races during their time on the show, but that didn't stop them from getting in trouble. Derek Travis, for example, was fired by his boss because he participated in the show. Travis said his boss at the time was uncomfortable with his on-screen activities, which ultimately led to the loss of his employment. It ended well though, as Travis says he got an even better job where his boss knew about his racing hobby and even supported him. Travis losing his job wasn't the worst time in the history of the show, as worse things found a way to happen. For example, the show's car shop was once shot at by real-life criminals. The criminal in this case shot at the shop 11 times. Thankfully, no one was in the shop at the time and everything ended up well. Sadly, that wouldn't be the show's last run-in with criminals. The Street Outlaws drive really expensive vehicles, and these vehicles are generally magnets for armed robbers. That's why it wasn't really surprising when James the Reaper Goat got his vehicle stolen by a criminal. Thankfully, he recovered the car just 2 days after the robbery. Strangely, the Reaper wasn't the only one who suffered this fate. David Bird Jones also had his car stolen by thieves. Unfortunately, the car was never returned to him. The Street Outlaws run-in with criminals wasn't only limited to their vehicles and their shop, they also had a criminal in the cast itself. The criminal in this case was Ronnie Pollard, who was arrested for engine theft. While Pollard was only an occasional writer, he'd been shown on enough episodes of the show to be recognizable by people who watched the show. Despite all of that, the Street Outlaws weren't done with criminals just yet. Peter Christian, a member of the show's cast, was also arrested for running crystal meth. That's right, Christian was also accused of using his shop as a cover for running drugs. When he was interrogated, Christian confessed that all the charges against him were true, and he had a supplier and supplied him the methamphetamines. The biggest secret about the show, though, must be the trial of Izzy Valenzuela. Unfortunately for Izzy, a driver on the show, he became involved in a car crash that killed 2 bystanders. In the aftermath of the crash, Izzy tried to deny ever being at the scene. However, his alibi didn't hold up, and the 60+ witnesses at the scene were clear about seeing him on the spot. This led to the arrest of Izzy. Fortunately for him, further reports established that he hadn't been driving the vehicle when the crash happened, and he was acquitted. The person driving the vehicle, though, got 12 long years in prison. The Street Outlaws was an amazing show with its controversies and secrets, just like every other show. These secrets, as dark as they might be, will certainly not stop anyone from watching the show, and perhaps it shouldn't. After all, don't we all have skeletons in our closets? Okay, maybe not all of us, but you get the point.